All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar with Redox. My name is Erin Trimble. I'm VP of Provider Organizations here. A few logistics before we get rolling. If you want to ask a question during the session, there's an Ask a Question button at the bottom. We'll have about 40 minutes or so of content here, and then we'll leave some time at the end to answer some of those. So please go ahead and ask any questions you have throughout the session using that button. There's also a couple polls we've asked you guys to fill out to get a sense of who's in the room today. So please take a moment to complete those. And then if you're interested in learning more about Redox, you want to schedule a one-on-one with someone from our business development team to talk more, there's a button down at the bottom that you can use to do that. Great. All right, guys, let's get started. So if you're here today, you probably got wind of the news that Redox was recently selected as a Gartner cool vendor in the healthcare providers category. And kind of in the wake of that news, we've gotten a flurry of questions from folks who want to learn more about what makes us so cool. And so the goal of today's session is to break down what makes Redox's approach to integration so unique as compared to other solutions on the market today. So before we dive into that, let's talk about what it means to be selected as a cool vendor. Gartner cool vendors are organizations that are recognized for their innovative, impactful, and pioneering work in their respective industries. If you had a chance to take a look at the report, or if you do so after this webinar, you'll find that many of the cool vendors selected in the healthcare segment are those that are helping CIOs achieve some of their most pressing objectives by empowering various digital transformation efforts. They're, in many cases, leveraging interoperability or real-time data or even artificial intelligence to materially improve both clinical and financial performance for these healthcare delivery organizations, or HDOs as we'll refer to them today. So it's been pretty well acknowledged by Gartner and other industry experts that digital progress is very much an imperative for today's healthcare CIOs and their teams. Many healthcare delivery organizations are facing declining profit margins. They're seeing increased competition from market consolidation or just new forms of care delivery coming into the market. And they're generally struggling with somewhat shaky consumer and patient engagement that makes patient retention a real challenge. And a recent study from the American Hospital Association very much backs up this need for digital innovation and some of the challenges associated with it. That study found that 75% of health system leaders believe digital innovation is absolutely essential to meeting their long-term goals and really establishing a competitive advantage in an increasingly crowded market. At the same time, nearly an equal percentage of IT leaders believe that their department does not have sufficient resources to effectively support digital innovation. And what we're left with is the fact that it takes, on average, almost 2 years from identifying a digital innovation need to actually implementing and scaling a solution to meet that need. And more than half of health system leaders believe that time put into digital innovation is being spent inefficiently. And so at Redox, we call this problem the innovation adoption gap. And this is really the problem we've set out to solve for the healthcare delivery organizations we work with. So a few folks on the call might be familiar with Redox. For others, this may be brand new for you. So let's talk about what Redox does exactly. At the most basic level, Redox lays a foundation for digital transformation for healthcare delivery organizations. At the core of our solution is a standards and vendor agnostic integration engine. That integration engine has the ability to transform legacy interfaces of all forms into a suite of modern APIs. And those APIs can be used to power applications across the continuum of care. Once that reusable application layer is in place, once a healthcare organization is connected to Redox, that organization is positioned to rapidly adopt and deploy new technology without placing an excessive burden on their IT teams, who would, in many instances, have to build a new custom interface every time they want to adopt a new application. And ultimately what this means is that we can really empower innovation and IT teams to move faster by cutting down those integration and implementation timelines from what can be 6, 12, 18 months to a matter of just a couple weeks. So I'm sure some of the folks who are on the call are saying, well, this might sound too good to be true, but let's dig deeper into how we actually do this technically. And I want to do that by using the example of a message as it's sent from a healthcare delivery organization through Redox to a destination application. And for the purpose of this example, we'll use an appointment cancellation message as an example. So on the left-hand side of this diagram, you see a representation of a typical health systems data center. You have the EHR, an interface engine, and a host of other kind of legacy on-prem systems that live within that data center. And so that particular appointment cancellation message is generated by the EHR and typically travels through that on-premise interface engine before making its way to Redox via VPN. And what's important to note here is that message can come to us in any standard or format or language that this health system has readily available. Because we are a standards agnostic platform, there's no need for that healthcare organization to map to a specific Redox spec. In many instances, that appointment cancellation typically comes across on an HL7 SIU feed, but some organizations may have a preference to use web services or some other standard or format. So that message comes to Redox. We're based in AWS, so we're a cloud-hosted solution, and it hits what we call a configuration. And so we have this library of configurations that you can think of as a repository of pre-built connectors to dozens of EHRs, standards, workflows that ingest that incoming message in whatever language or format it comes to us in and map it to our canonical model and API. So in this case, that particular appointment cancellation message would be mapped to our scheduling data model, which is one of 17 data models we have in place today. So we pull from this configuration library for every new connection that we do with a new health system. And because we can pull from that library, we really only have to do the last mile of customization, that last 10% that is specific to that particular health system's EHR instance versus starting from scratch every time. So we're already 90% of the way there when we approach a new healthcare organization and start that implementation process. And that's part of really what allows us to reduce some of these integration timelines. Moving to the right here, the Redox engine is the core of our platform. And that's the engine that takes those messages that have been mapped to the API and processes that API traffic, standardizes and normalizes that data, and then transforms, filters, and routes messages to the corresponding destination applications. So we're handling all that filtering, routing, and so on within the Redox engine. And the last piece here is what we call data chateau. And it's sort of our flavor of a data warehouse. Data Chateau gives us the ability to store off normalized data and power a much wider range of workflows than would traditionally be possible with the event-based messaging used by most EHRs. So you can think of Data Chateau almost as a workflow normalization tool. And then moving to the right-hand side of the diagram, you see our application ecosystem. These are all of the primarily cloud-based applications that we connect to. Today, there's over 500 that are building on the Redox platform. These applications generally prefer to interact with our modern JSON-based API. They also have the option of working with Redox Fire, our implementation of Fire, although we do have the ability to translate that particular message into whatever their preferred spec might be. So assuming they're leveraging the Redox API, they would receive that appointment cancellation message in our standard JSON format via secure HTTP connection. One thing I want to call out is this doesn't just happen in one direction. So all Redox data models are bidirectional. So this bidirectional, this whole process works in reverse, meaning the application can send Redox a message in Redox JSON, and we will translate that back down to the preferred specification of that particular health system. So I think beyond just the technical piece here, what is important to and really critical to understanding how Redox is unique is understanding that we're not just a piece of technology. So we actually wrap that technology in a fully managed service. That means we take on the work of implementing the platform, of scoping new applications, writing those configurations, and supporting and maintaining those integrations for their lifetime. This includes integration strategy design. We're working with applications to ensure that they come to the table with a very well-defined and realistic integration strategy. Our implementation experts take on project management responsibilities and ensure that we're driving that project from start to finish. And with 24/7 support and monitoring, we're the ones acting as first responders to any issues that might pop up. So for the IT folks on the call, that means we're the ones waking up at 2 a.m. to respond to an issue, so you don't have to. So this combination of product and service results in what is a really unique ability to enable healthcare delivery organizations to very rapidly and efficiently adopt the tools they need to accomplish their strategic objectives, to improve care quality, and ultimately just execute on a digital transformation strategy. But the one core piece I haven't really touched on here is sort of the secret sauce behind all of this, which is our network. And by that, I mean that because we are a single instance cloud-based solution with a canonical model, all of the data we process from the hundreds of software applications and healthcare delivery organizations we work with is standardized and communicated via the same API. So that means once an organization connects to the network, every node on the network, every healthcare organization, every application is technically interoperable with every other node, whether they speak the same language or not. So now that you've learned a little bit about Redox, we really want to get at the core of how we're different by helping you understand where we fit in the broader interoperability landscape. And so I want to spend some time digging into some of the more popular kind of integration and interoperability solutions available on the market today and how Redox compares. This certainly isn't comprehensive, but these are the types of solutions we get compared to most often. So those are the ones we're going to spend some time on today. So we'll start off with interface engines. You heard me mention those earlier when I was talking through kind of the technical diagram of Redox. Many of you on the call are probably familiar with these solutions. Pretty much any acute care facility with an enterprise EHR almost certainly has a traditional interface engine in place today. These solutions have been pretty widely adopted alongside EHRs with kind of Cloverleaf, CorePoint, Ensemble as just a few examples of some of the more popular vendors in this space. These solutions essentially allow different healthcare IT systems to exchange data by providing a tool for interface teams. So they enable interface teams to develop new interfaces, filter, transform, route, and troubleshoot them using a set of fairly common standards like HL7 or CDA. What's important to note is that these are typically on-premise systems, and I almost think of them as like an appliance. So that appliance can't do anything unless you have a team staff to work with it and manage it and build in it. And so they have to be managed by healthcare organizations, IT team, particularly their interface or integration team. One thing to note is, as on-premise systems, these solutions are really optimized for connecting applications that reside on a local network or in the same data center, as opposed to applications that live outside the four walls of that data center, i.e. in the cloud. And that's where Redox can really come in. We're actually quite complementary to traditional interface engines in that we can serve as that bridge to this growing ecosystem of cloud-based technology where the interface engine and that interface team can really focus their time on building and maintaining integrations across on-premise systems, and Redox can handle the connections to cloud-based applications. Next up, API management platforms. So some familiar vendors in this space, Apogee, owned by Google, falls into this category, as does MuleSoft, along with a number of other smaller players. And these platforms allow healthcare delivery organizations to really spin up and publish proprietary APIs for both internal developers as well as external vendors to consume. So that means they include tools like the ability to analyze usage, monitor performance, and control user access, so on and so forth. And so these platforms do enable healthcare organizations to stand up a suite of reusable, albeit custom APIs. So while you get the benefits of a modern API for internal and external developers to interact with, what these platforms don't do is facilitate data standardization across different independent healthcare delivery organizations, meaning you do miss out on the network effect in having inherent in having all of those users exchange data via the same API model. And the last thing I'll touch on is that these solutions are really great for supporting a wide range of enterprise integration use cases. But what I'll highlight is that they weren't built for healthcare. And so they often lack the domain expertise necessary to facilitate deep clinical integrations with EHRs. All right, next up is EHR marketplaces. So EHR marketplaces are a little bit unique here, and that they are programs that EHR vendors offer themselves as opposed to some sort of third-party integration solution. These marketplaces are probably best described as partnership programs. These programs enable partnerships between the EHR and other third-party vendors in that they facilitate the distribution and integration of those vendors by providing access to an EHR-specific API. You see some of the examples down along the bottom here, the Epic App Orchard, Allscripts has a marketplace, Athena, pretty much every major EHR vendor today is offering some flavor of a marketplace. And these vendors generally position these programs as app stores for their provider organization customers. Similar to API management platforms, these programs leverage a proprietary API. This time it's unique to that particular EHR vendor. And in some instances, that API can be limited in terms of the breadth of data available as compared to other interface methods that particular EHR might support, such as HL7. A few of these are also read-only in nature, and so you have to occasionally leverage other integration methods to accommodate any workflows that need to write back to the EHR. And the last thing I'll highlight here is by the nature of the business models of these programs, these EHR marketplaces are limited to applications who choose to participate and pay the fees, often a revenue share, required to partner with that particular EHR vendor. So there are vendors who, that the economics of that don't necessarily work for them and may not have joined that marketplace. I'd also highlight that some of these programs do exclude applications that could be considered competitive with certain EHR functionality. So as a healthcare organization looking to find a particular solution on one of these marketplaces, keep that in mind and know that your preferred vendor may not be a part of this program. And so that may not be an effective option. And the last kind of category I'll touch on is health information exchanges, or HIEs. The best way to think of HIEs is kind of these trusted networks or alliances of provider organizations, independent provider organizations, who have agreed to kind of facilitate the exchange of patient-related information. These provider organizations are typically in the same geography, and the reason they're coming together is because as a function of being in the same geography, they often have overlapping patient populations. So they are proactively agreeing to exchange data for the purpose of improving care across those organizations. The vendors in this space are offering up some combination of technology and services to help these alliances actually create and operate an HIE. And that technology can include the ability to match patients across independent organizations, as well as exchange clinical data. The breadth of that data can be limited in some instances. The primary data you see being exchanged is kind of a CCD, a sort of clinical summary document Occasionally you see results data, like lab results, as well as ADT data, admissions, discharge, and transfer information being exchanged, but it certainly doesn't comprise the full breadth of data that might be available in the clinical record. And as I mentioned, these are primarily used for provider-to-provider integration, so there isn't really an API typically for vendors to interact with. And what we've seen is that because of these regional limitations, because vendors don't really interact with them, these business models often tend to fail in practice, and successful regional HIEs are really only limited to a handful of states that have invested heavily in some public sector support for these programs. So CORIO, the Colorado Regional Health Information Organization, is one such example of that, but that's not something we see repeated across a large number of states or regions. So kind of taking a step back and looking at the different categories we've discussed today, a lot of folks, kind of Gartner included, have struggled to define Redox and put us into one of these categories. You know, are we an interface engine? Are we an API management platform? Are we an HIE? And the short answer is we're none of these, and that's part of what makes us cool. If you look across the interoperability solutions we've covered and compare them to Redox, Redox is really the only one that's delivering, first, a truly standardized and normalized data across organizations, a suite of modern APIs for developers to interact with, and a truly network-based approach to integration, all packaged as a fully managed service. And it's this unique combination that really sets us apart from other solutions on the market today. So now that you understand a little bit about Redox and what sets us apart, I want to spend our last few minutes here talking about when it might make sense for you or your organization to work with Redox, and when Redox might be the right solution to meet your integration needs. This is primarily focused on the kind of healthcare organization side of things. If you're a vendor, I encourage you to check out some of our other resources, and we frequently have webinars targeted at that segment, or you can schedule a one-on-one meeting using that button below. But I want to talk about, because we're this case study, by using or highlighting the work we've done with one of our flagship customers, which is Brigham and Women's Hospital. If you're not familiar with Brigham and Women's, they're an 800-ish bed teaching hospital based in Boston. They are part of Partners Healthcare, kind of the broader parent organization, which also includes Massachusetts General Hospital and a number of others. And they have an innovation hub. And this innovation hub consists of a small but dedicated team that whose primary objective is to identify and evaluate digital solutions that support an array of Brigham's strategic priorities. And so they, as a team, want to be able to pilot upwards of 10 to 20 applications a year across that organization. And they want to do so in a way that can enable them to make really efficient and informed decisions about new technology before they invest in a broader rollout beyond that pilot. Some of the challenges they were facing in accomplishing that were a really heavy dependency on Partners IT, generally a slow pace of integration projects, as well as a lack of vendor readiness for these integration projects. They're working with a lot of very early stage companies who don't have much, if any, experience doing EHR integration. And all of those things presented major barriers to the quick and effective piloting and evaluation of solutions. So their goal in working with Redox has been to accelerate that adoption and deployment of new technology, to increase the throughput of projects, to increase autonomy by reducing kind of Brigham's dependencies on the broader Partners IT organization, and ultimately foster those strategic objectives. So digging into what we do with Redox, what we do with the Brigham on a day-to-day basis, our partnership really starts pretty far upstream from integration, as early as when just a particular need has been identified. So as an example, Brigham might say, we recognize that we need a telehealth solution. We want to start evaluating telehealth vendors. Redox can help with that initial sourcing and vetting by coming to the table and say, hey, here's a dozen telehealth vendors that are already connected to Redox, and you can have the confidence that these particular vendors have already gone live successfully at other health systems. So once an application has been selected and we've kind of helped play that personalized matchmaking role, we then help them prioritize and strategize around their pipeline. So we help the Brigham generally optimize for quick wins and really the fastest time to go live for a particular application. So as an example, applications that are already connected to Redox, that have already built to the Redox API, will inherently move faster because half the work is already done. Same thing goes for applications that are using interfaces that we've already stood up for other projects at the Brigham. That data is already readily available for consumption and can really accelerate that project. And so we help them tailor their pipeline of, say, 10 applications to optimize for those that can get live quickly. And then from there, we dig into the real integration work and work hand in hand with Brigham's IT team. So that starts with connectivity. We've really simplified VPN management for the Brigham because in connecting to us once, we handle all of the connectivity with every other individual application. So the Brigham only has one VPN to manage with Redox, as opposed to dozens of VPNs with a whole host of different applications. We take on the work of workflow scoping and integration strategy that I mentioned earlier in this session, making sure applications come to the table with a well-defined scope. And then we write those configurations and do that work to really create that reusable application layer, thus reducing the burden on IT. And for Brigham, that actually means not waiting months to get an IT resource assigned to that particular project. Our integration experts are driving those projects through testing and go live. And then we deliver 24/7 support and maintenance for the lifetime of any integration managed by Redox, including accommodating for any system upgrades or things like that. So the last thing I want to touch on is how does an organization like Brigham think about their return on investment with Redox? And an innovation leader at another one of our customers, a large Cerner shop on the East Coast, put it really well. He said, you know, everyone wants rapid, accurate, scalable integration. They want it because the vendor often isn't getting paid until that project is done. And we as the health system aren't seeing the ROI of that vendor until that work is done. And so every month we spend waiting for resources or waiting for an integration project to be completed is a month of either missed revenue or kind of cost savings and efficiency gains from that particular third-party application. And so if Redox can cut down what we call the mean time to integration by 2 months, which we did in this case, that's 2 months of additional revenue or cost savings from that application in the health system's pocket, not to mention the fact that there's a reduced burden on IT teams, on innovation, on project managers, and so on. So going back to kind of our opening of this session about digital innovation and transformation being a real necessity for today's healthcare delivery organizations competing in this market, cutting down that mean time to integration and really accelerating the time to value for these applications can be instrumental in helping these organizations establish a competitive advantage and achieve their long-term objectives. So with that, I'll end with a few final notes on Redox before we open it up for questions. A little bit of our background. We were founded in 2014 by a few ex-Epic folks. We've raised $14 million in venture capital funding to date. We're currently live at over 250 healthcare organizations across the country, supporting integrations with over 500 enterprise healthcare applications. We're headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin, with outposts all over the country. I'm based down there in Austin, Texas. And we exist to make healthcare data useful. If you've liked what you saw today, if you want to learn more, I do encourage you to check out the full cool vendor report from Gartner. We'll be following up to everyone that attended this session with a link to see that report. And as always, you can reach out to me, Erin Trimble, at erin@redoxengine.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you have thoughts, comments, questions, or just want to learn more, feel free to shoot me a note. And with that, we're going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to invite one of my colleagues at Redox to help me out with that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We've got a few questions. We're going to start with a question from Allie. Is the Redox solution, quote unquote, approved as an integration solution by notoriously difficult EHR vendors, for example, Epic?
Yeah, so we kind of fit in the same category from Epic's perspective as an interface engine. These are complementary solutions that work alongside a whole host of EHR vendors and really are synergistic in that capacity. So we've today integrated with over 40 different EHR vendors, Epic included. I think we've done a few dozen Epic sites at this point, and have not run into any challenges there. So no worries on the approved and formality of some of those more notorious vendors.
All right. The next one is from Nagesh. With API management, so kind of, Erin, back to the section that you did on the different solutions that exist, is there any gap in functionality for healthcare in particular?
Yeah, great question. And I think I touched on that a little bit, but let's elaborate. So if you look at solutions like Apogee or MuleSoft, as I said, these are great solutions if you want to kind of stand up your own suite of custom APIs and particularly tackle kind of broader enterprise integration use cases. Those organizations did not get their start in healthcare. And as everyone on this webinar probably knows, healthcare is its unique industry and a bit of a beast in certain ways. And so that's where us having really deep knowledge of EHRs, of integration options, and how to, craft an integration with a particular EHR is really a differentiator there. I've heard from a number of healthcare organizations that those particular API management platforms tend to struggle when it comes to accommodating clinical data. So you're correct that there is somewhat of a gap there in their healthcare expertise and experience.
Great. Our next one is from Sharud. What is the response from provider institutions on having to pay upwards of $100K for more IT solutions?
That's a great question. So obviously, especially if they've made what can be a multi-million, if not billion-dollar EHR investment, many organizations are on the surface, at least, very budget conscious and maybe resistant to adopting new technology. That said, what I've noticed in market in my time in working at Redox and working specifically with a wide range of provider organizations is that there is a pretty broad acceptance at this point that the EHR cannot do everything an organization may need, and that the adoption of complementary and niche solutions is very much a necessity to accomplishing the strategic objectives, to improving patient engagement, and overall just being more competitive in the marketplace. And so I actually don't run into that resistance of new technology adoption particularly often. If anything, these organizations are trying to spin up innovation arms and teams to help them move faster in adopting that technology.
All right. A question from Bruce. How is the Redox routing managed? What does the EHR need to provide along with a message for that message to reach final destination? So kind of just understanding what, and this is, hopefully I'm getting this right, Bruce, but basically, what is it that the health system needs to do in order to be able to do that data exchange via Redox?
Yeah, so great question. First thing is they need to help facilitate connectivity with us. So we have to stand up that VPN. Once that's complete, we just need their example messages and whatever format they choose to send that particular data. So I used the example of an appointment cancellation message earlier. Oftentimes that comes across on HL7 SIU feed, but that particular health system may have different preferences for the standard or protocol they would want to use to exchange that type of data. Maybe it's a web service or something like that. They essentially give Redox what we call a pass-through interface, or whatever they have available off the shelf. So unlike most of their traditional integration projects, we no longer have to map to some other vendor's spec. They send us what they have off the shelf, and we handle that configuration and mapping for them. Obviously, once that message data is being exchanged in a test environment, and ultimately production, we're doing complete end-to-end testing with them. So we do ask health systems to be involved on that front as well. What's awesome is that when the next project comes along with that particular organization, we already have the VPN set up, so we skip that step. And in many instances, we already have the interfaces necessary for this new use case, or at least some subset of that data. So there's a much lighter lift on the health system to get that next application live. And that's what you see is after the first 2, 3, 4 projects, the lift required on the part of the integration team is substantially lessened.
Great. Another question from Bruce, and I can take this one, was just whether or not Redox has provided solutions in Canada. So Bruce, this is actually something that we have looked into. For most of the Canadian provinces, we can support. If you're in British Columbia or Nova Scotia, there's a few other considerations, but it's something that we have done some investigation into. We have not provided a solution in Canada yet, but are open to talking more. If you want to hit that schedule one-on-one button, we can get you on the phone to talk with someone more specifically about how Redox can work in Canada. Another question from James, and James, I might have you type some clarifications in. So the question is, I see consultants as part of the Redox partners ecosystem. How does an organization become a part of that ecosystem? So I believe the question here is if I'm a consultant, how can I become a part of the Redox ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we often don't have kind of direct engagements with consultants. The consultants I've had the opportunity to work with are those that are helping healthcare organizations either spin up innovation arms or source new technology. Oftentimes organizations, if they're searching, say, for a new patient engagement vendor or telehealth vendor, will hire a consultant to help with that search. And that's where we've collaborated with those folks to sort of help play matchmaker there. But we're certainly open to other types of engagements that might be interesting. So I'd encourage you to reach out with that schedule one-on-one button on the screen.
Great. And Doug had kind of a clarifying question, Aaron, when you were speaking about having healthcare systems send those data feeds, which was to fit with HIPAA data requirements.
I'm not sure how to best answer that question. The answer I would give you is that we are completely HIPAA compliant and high trust certified. And so from a security perspective, we obviously make that very much our top priority, and have not had any issues or hesitations there when folks kind of see the robustness of our security program.
And that hits all of the questions that people had submitted. Oh, Nikita's chiming in with some more. So is Redox a cloud service that provides the highways for exchanging info, or do we also keep the data at rest on behalf of the providers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a little bit of both. So we are primarily that highway for exchanging data, right? Where we are a cloud service that is essentially enabling this integration and for data to pass through from a healthcare organization to applications and vice versa. That said, I mentioned our Data Chateau product earlier. So if there is interest in accommodating a particular workflow that can't typically be supported by more of an event-based messaging type that most EHRs support, we can store off that normalized data and allow an application to query for it as needed. So we're not serving as a full-on data warehouse for provider organizations, but we do have the option of enabling and storing off some of that data for workflow normalization.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining. We're going to go ahead and close things down and let people have a few more minutes to get ready for your next meeting. As Aaron mentioned, we'll be sending out a follow-up that has the link to the recording and a link to that Gartner webinar report. If you haven't already, feel free to schedule a one-on-one meeting with one of our solutions consultants to talk through your specific use cases. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, guys.